My mother chose a holiday toast to turn me into a joke. Not in our cramped family dining room, but in a glass-walled restaurant at an over-the-top ski lodge in Lake Tahoe. She stood up between the main course and dessert, crystal flute in hand, and tapped her knife against the rim until the chatter dropped. "I just want to say how proud I am," she began, beaming at the table. "I have 2 daughters. One is a star attorney, and the other one," she paused for effect, "is basically a street beggar." The table broke apart. People laughed so hard they leaned on each other. Someone actually sprayed wine. Cutlery rattled on plates. I felt every face swivel my way, eyes flicking from my thrift cardigan to my beat-up boots, the same pair I'd thrown on after closing up the co-working space the night before. "Remember when she said she was going to be an Olympian or something?" a cousin quipped. "Be nice," my aunt added. "At least she's perfected the art of surfing couches." "You're lucky we haven't changed the locks yet," my dad chimed in, smug. "Consider it our charity," my teenage nephew muttered, not quietly enough. If I were her, I'd disappear. I didn't give them the show they wanted. No tears, no shouting. I just wrapped my fingers around my grandmother's silver pendant, let the cool metal anchor me, pushed my chair back, and walked out of that picture-perfect dining room. No one called my name. No one followed me into the hall. 1 week later, at 6:01 a.m., my phone buzzed on my nightstand. Mom's credit card just got rejected at the grocery store. Is the bank system down? At 8:10 a.m., why is our portfolio tanking? The automatic transfers didn't happen. At 10:42 a.m., the financial advisor says several accounts are under investigation. What did you touch? At 11:30 a.m., please, Harper, don't do this. We know we went too far at dinner. Call me. Tell me where you are. If you want to know what changed in the 7 days between their laughter and their panic, you have to start in my crappy little apartment in Reno and rewind. When I got back from Tahoe that night, I let my suitcase slide to the floor by the door and didn't bother with the lights. I could still hear the roar of their laughter every time I blinked. My mom, Cheryl, raising her glass and calling me basically a street beggar in a designer dress I'd watched her buy on a card that was already near its limit. My dad, Ron, tossing in his charity joke like a cherry on top. My older sister, Madison, the star lawyer, sitting there in her blazer and heels, not opening her mouth once to disagree. My brother, Jake, had smirked like always, the way he does when someone else is the butt of a joke and he's relieved it's not him. The truth is, I had years of practice being the punchline. Growing up, Madison's academic awards lived in their own glass shrine in the hallway. Jake's trophies, varsity captain, business club, future entrepreneur, took over half the mantle. My soccer medals, stuffed in a shoebox behind the coats. When my college athletics hopes blew up with one bad slide tackle and a torn ACL, my memory of that time is full of ice buckets and scar cream and physical therapy, not of choice. In my parents' retelling, or it slowly morphed into something closer to, Harper gave up. I was the kid who sketched brand ideas in the margins of math tests and begged for a cheap secondhand laptop so I could teach myself design and basic coding off forums and YouTube. Every time I floated the idea of starting something, my parents smiled politely and said things like, "Well, that's cute." Or maybe once you have a real job, you can do your little projects on weekends. At Sunday dinners, Mom liked to say, "If you worked half as hard as Maddie, you'd be pulling 6 figures by now." Dad would chuckle and tell anyone within earshot, "Harper's still finding herself," as if I weren't sitting right there. Jake entertained himself by keeping count of all the side gigs I took to pay rent. Dog walking, food delivery, freelance logos, contract UX work. "Wah, she's allergic to stability," he'd say, smirking. Madison wouldn't join in. She'd just stay quiet. But in families like mine, silence isn't neutral. It's approval, wrapped in plausible deniability. So when they laughed at me in Tahoe, it wasn't some shocking betrayal. It was just louder, sharper, public. It was the moment I finally admitted to myself that in the story my parents liked to tell, I wasn't a late bloomer. I was the example of what not to be. On the drive back through the snow-edged roads from Tahoe to Reno, I kept my hands around the steering wheel and my Grandma May's pendant, feeling the tiny engraved initials under my thumb every time the car rattled over a pothole. She'd been the only person who ever looked past my messy resume and saw a pattern. "You don't have to be the framed diploma to matter," she'd tell me. "But you do have to step out of the corner they keep putting you in." It took me this long to understand she wasn't being poetic. The next morning, I woke up before the sky really changed and pulled on running shoes and a hoodie. The cold hit my lungs on the trail, each breath turning into fog as I pounded along. With every step, their comments played in my head on a loop. The beggar toast. The time Dad told a neighbor I just hadn't grown up yet. The years of maybe next year you'll finally figure it out. They hurt, but beneath the hurt, something stiffened. Somewhere between the 2nd-mile marker and the view of the river, a thought snapped clean into place. You don't get to name me anymore. I stopped, hands braced on my knees, heart hammering. And I knew 2 other things with the kind of certainty that only happens when you've run yourself too far to lie to yourself. 1, I was done trying to earn my way into a script that never had a space with my name printed on it. 2, my parents and siblings had no idea whose work had been quietly holding their own lives together. They had no idea about the nights I'd spent hunched over a laptop writing rules and triggers so their interest penalties wouldn't skyrocket, their mortgage wouldn't go 30-plus days late, their business accounts wouldn't bounce checks. They sat there calling me a mooch while living off safety nets I had built beneath their notice. I straightened, wiped my face with my sleeve in the thin winter light, thumbed the pendant and made a decision. What, I wasn't going to scream at them or make a scene in a hotel lobby with printouts in hand. I was going to do something far more devastating. I was going to stop redirecting my surplus into their holes, stop retiming bill payments, stop being the shadow bookkeeper nobody thanked or acknowledged. Let the invoices and statements and declined transactions tell them what they refused to hear from me. Let them find out how stable they really were when the beggar walked away. Most people in my family think I ghostwrite emails for influencers and sometimes deliver food when it rains. That's the story that makes them comfortable. It allows them to believe I'm adrift while they are planted. The real story started 5 years ago in a warehouse-style co-working space in downtown Reno with bad coffee and worse lighting. I was 23, nursing a busted knee and the shame of a failed wellness app I'd put everything into. Sitting across from me was Ethan Lynn, who seemed to trust my brain more than anyone with my last name ever had. He'd seen my sketches, my rough mock-ups, the wireframes no one else had looked twice at. "Freelancers are terrible with money," he'd said one long night when we were both sticking around after close. "They get paid in random chunks, owe taxes they don't understand, forget to pay themselves first. What if we build something that does the thinking for them?" It was dumb and brilliant and obvious. And it became LedgerLoom, an app that tracks your different income streams, calculates what you should siphon off for tax, automates boring stuff like utilities and insurance, and lets you set rules. If my balance falls below this, pause extra debt paydowns. If I get more than X this week, send 20% to savings automatically. I built the flows on cheap chai and stubbornness. UX, UI, prototypes coded on a laptop that wheezed when I opened Photoshop and my terminal at the same time. Ethan handled the other half: growth plans, investor decks, calling tax experts to make sure we weren't telling users something illegal. We launched our MVP to a handful of friends: a wedding photographer, 3 Etsy sellers, a guy who ran ads for local plumbers. I still walked dogs and ran Instacart orders in the evenings. I still did corporate slide decks for companies I didn't believe in. I still heard my father say I was messing around with apps instead of getting a career. Bit by bit, things changed. A financial blogger discovered LedgerLoom and featured it. Word a YouTuber with a channel about quitting your 9-to-5 mentioned us. More people signed up. We weren't an overnight success story, but we were growing. We hired one engineer, then another. Ethan and I both went full-time on it. We incorporated. We hired a real accountant. At some point, a local paper ran a story. Reno native helps freelancers build real safety nets. They quoted me. They photographed me. My parents never saw it. They don't read the business section. Meanwhile, their lives, and my siblings' lives, weren't as bulletproof as they looked from the outside. Jake's boutique fitness studio in Portland had been hammered by closures. Classes limited, rent still due, loans still looming. Insurance only ever seemed to cover half of what he thought. Madison's darling of the firm reputation in LA came with massive outlays up front. She'd put expenses for a few high-profile cases on personal plastic before reimbursement. Paying a nanny, sky-high rent, law school debt still pacing her. My parents had sworn they were fine. In reality, they were juggling a mortgage, Dad's high blood pressure meds, car notes, and the hangover of a refinancing they barely understood. Our Aunt Tara's coffee cart business, operating on a shoestring near the university, was one slow season away from folding. On social media, they were all thriving. In late-night calls, in emails framed as just venting, they bled. And I listened. Ledger Loom, sitting quietly on my laptop, had all the tools you'd want if you were trying to avoid exactly the kind of mess they were in. One night, but after a particularly long call from Mom about late fees out of nowhere and bankers trying to rob us, something in me broke toward them instead of away. I opened my own instance of Ledger Loom. I created a folder called Anchor. Inside it, 5 sub-accounts. Jake, lease and equipment. Maddie, cards and childcare. Mom and Dad, mortgage and utilities. Tara, cart loan. Emergencies, general. Then I pointed a portion of my own income rules toward those. 20% of every consulting check. 10% of my co-founder's salary once we started paying ourselves. Unexpected bonus, 50% to Anchor. Ledger Loom didn't care whose name was on the target accounts. It saw numbers. So did I. I set up external payment rules. If Mom and Dad's mortgage went more than 21 days past due, top it up. If Jake's studio account dipped below X dollars, you recover the least difference. If Maddie's card interest hit more than Y in a month, knock down the balance. If Tara's cart loan missed a payment, pay it before default. I coded it all in, ethically, transparently, from Ledger Loom's perspective. The money always came from my account. I wasn't moving their funds around, just applying mine to their obligations. I didn't tell them. Partly because I knew precisely what my parents would do with that information, and partly because I knew this was my choice. And if I was honest, because a part of me still clung to this fantasy, maybe if I fixed enough, they'd stop seeing me as the cautionary tale. The thing about little leaks is that they turn into oceans. Over 4+ years, those just this once top-ups became a tide. By the time I sat in my dark apartment after Tahoe, Ledger Loom reported that I had put just shy of $290,000 of my personal money into other people's holes. Roughly $95,000 into my parents' mortgage, taxes, and recurring utilities. $80,000 into Jake's studio between leases, equipment, and bailout months. $75,000 toward Madison's cards and childcare shock absorbers. $40,000 into Tara's small business debt and cart upkeep. Not in big dramatic chunks, in countless little payments. $1,700 here, $800 there, $350 top up when an auto pay was about to bounce. Enough to build something for myself, a house deposit, a travel fund, an investment portfolio. I used it to build air under them instead. While they joked about me living on friends' sofas, I was literally turning my profit into a silent net beneath their lives. While Mom stood in Tahoe in a fawn-colored cashmere dress she'd financed, calling me basically a beggar, she was wearing my risk on her back. That's what their toast cost me. Sitting there, back home in Reno, hands still stiff from the steering wheel in my run, I opened Ledger Loom and stared at the Anchor dashboard. 4 columns full of green check marks. I hovered my cursor over the automation switches. Then I clicked them off, one by one. No more automatic transfers on Fridays. No more smoothing late payments into on time. No more rounding my windfalls up and sending them their way. I didn't touch their own rules. I didn't touch user permissions. I didn't touch cached credentials for Mom's mortgage app or Jake's business account. All I did was tell my app, stop sending my money there. Ledger Loom chirped a small, neutral confirmation each time. To the outside world, nothing changed. Inside the pipes, everything did. Bills would still arrive. Only now, when the due date came and went, the mysterious rescue wouldn't. They wanted to call me a charity case? Fine. Let's see how their solidity felt without the charity they hadn't noticed. It didn't take long. That first text from Mom at 6:01 a.m. came when one of her usual grocery runs met the actual remaining balance instead of my invisible top-up. Her, at the store, with a basket full of organic snacks and a handful of vitamin bottles, card declined. Her brain, bank glitch, tech issue. Riley, me. It's finally your turn to deal with reality. When she followed it up with a message about the mortgage warning and, I thought you set all this on autopilot, my chest twisted. Well, but not enough to reach for the old switches again. By mid-morning, Dad was on my call log. He sounded like someone who'd sprinted upstairs too fast. The advisor says the retirement payouts are paused until we clear some delinquent accounts, he said. The landlord over in Sacramento called asking about back rent. Did you mess with our settings? I didn't do anything, I said. Ledger Loom is just not bending physics for you anymore. Don't get clever with me, he snapped. This started after you stormed out. You must have pulled something. That app was supposed to make sure this didn't happen. That app did exactly what it was told for years, I answered. The problem was, you never realized whose orders it was following, he spluttered. I hung up. Natalie's email arrived a little later. Lawyers complain in paragraphs. Her Amex had been frozen pending irregular activity on her accounts. Not fraud, risk. She fired off a message accusing me of interfering with integrated systems and threatening legal consequences. I stared at the screen, feeling weirdly calm. I hadn't touched a single pixel of her login, only my own output. By the end of the week, Aunt Tara had texted me a screenshot of her business loan app, big orange banner across it. In arrears. "We are going to lose the cart," she wrote. "I don't understand. The bank always extended us. Can you check if there's a bug on your end?" I wrote back. "There's no bug. There was a subsidy. It's gone. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But it also felt disgustingly like sanity. For once, I wasn't patching over their choices. For once, the consequences were landing where they belonged." When my parents flew to Reno and showed up at the cafe where I like to work, they weren't just angry. They were afraid. They needed a story where this wasn't their fault. The hacker narrative was the easiest. It let them point to me as the rogue element. In reality, the only person LedgerLoom had ever treated preferentially was my family, and that favor had been turned off by the owner of the funds, not the software. When they agreed to meet again, the Thursday night confrontation in the coffee shop, then the Monday morning meeting in my office, it gave me something I hadn't had in years: their full attention. I didn't romanticize it. I didn't plan a dramatic monologue. I compiled numbers, timelines, payment histories, company ownership. I brought Noah to back me up. I also brought something else: boundaries. I wasn't there to ask for their approval or their forgiveness. I was there to put the real story on the table and then decide, based on how they handled that reality, what kind of contact I was willing to have with them in the future. They came in thinking they might be able to scare me into turning the flows back on or wedge a stake into LedgerLoom. Natalie especially came in believing she could spin some novel legal theory about shared intellectual property and family contributions. What they ran into instead was a table full of receipts and a co-founder with his own lawyers and investors. LedgerLoom's cap table did not have a Lopez slot on it. It had me, Ethan, our early backers, our employees. My parents had never put a cent into it. They hadn't co-signed a loan, hadn't let us work out of their garage, hadn't risked their credit. If anything, the financial drag had been the other way around. Did it sting, hearing my sister say the quiet part? "We feel like we're owed a share," out loud. Yeah. But it also clarified something. If I turned the app back on for them, if I resumed the silent subsidies, it wouldn't be because they needed it. It would be because I couldn't stand watching them flail. And that was my work to do, not theirs. The Monday office meeting, with my family staring at my presentation and the folders of their histories, was less about delivering some fatal blow and more about drawing a line. "This is everything I did," I said, voice steady. "These are the numbers. This is who owns what. Here's what I'm willing to offer now: time, advice, referrals. And here's what I'm not: money, hidden rescues, all legal ownership." They didn't like it, but they understood it, and they couldn't unsee the evidence. Some relationships shifted. Tara sent back most of the printed summary with a check clipped to it months later, paying down what she could, scrawling "thank you" in the memo line. She later called and asked if LedgerLoom could help her forecast slow seasons so she wouldn't get slammed again. We built a feature together. Mason, my nephew, started hanging around the office after school, taking notes like a sponge, asking questions that made me see my own product with fresh eyes. When he pushed his first little helper script into our internal tools, Ethan joked that we'd found our next developer. Others didn't shift as much. Dad still thinks like a ledger. He has apologized for some things: the shove, the toast, the "lucky we haven't kicked you out" line. He's more careful now around my name. But when he talks about life, the words he reaches for still sound like balances, not relationships. Mom is softer. She still instinctively reaches for the "we were just joking" deflection when she's caught. But she has, on a few painful occasions, actually stopped midway and said, "That was mean. I shouldn't have said that." For a woman who defined herself by throwing shade, that's not nothing. Madison exists in a parallel universe. She pays her own bills now. Rumor has it she found a financial planner who talks to her like a client, not a sister, and for whatever reason, she can hear the same things from them that she couldn't when I said them. We're civil. Sometimes we're even almost kind. But the pedestal she stood on in Tahoe never quite recovered. We inhabit different stories now. Jake took the offer of help structuring an exit plan for his studio. He sold, lost his Instagram persona as Jake the Gym King, and got a job managing a chain location instead. He complains about having a boss. He doesn't call me a flake anymore. I don't expect a movie-ready redemption arc. I expect humans. Messy, inconsistent, occasionally surprising. I kept my promise to Mason. We started with Python basics and logic exercises. He groaned at first and then lit up when something worked. The day he built a tiny plugin that pulled some transaction patterns and flagged them for users, he looked 10 feet tall. "That's yours," I told him. "You did that." It was worth more to me than any check from a venture fund. Because I remembered being that kid and having no one with my last name say, "You're good at something that matters." Now I got to be that person for him. I didn't go back to Lake Tahoe for the next Thanksgiving. Instead, I went with a few friends to a cabin outside of Steamboat. We made too much food, burned the rolls, talked about childhoods and jobs and weird family expectations. Late that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I stepped outside in boots and a sweater and looked up at a sky full of stars that didn't care who had a degree or a company or a framed newspaper article. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom. No jokes this time. Just a photo of a small turkey on a too bright plate and the words, "Miss you, proud of you, proud, call when you can." I stared at it for a long second and then slid my phone back into my pocket. I would call, not because she'd earned unfettered access or because family is everything no matter what, but because I had finally built a life where picking up or letting it ring was my choice, not an obligation. That was the real shift. Not the money, not the company. The fact that for the first time, I wasn't dependent on their version of who I was allowed to be. If you're where I was, holding everything together for people who laugh in your face, hiding your own strength so they can keep their story intact, here's what I want you to hear. You're not cruel for stepping out of that role. You're not selfish for wanting respect with your love. You're not ungrateful for refusing to fund people's denial. Sometimes the bravest, kindest thing you can do for yourself and, weirdly, for them, is stop shielding them from the direct line between their choices and their consequences. That's not revenge. That's gravity. My parents wanted to believe I was the beggar in the family. All I did was pull my hand off the scale and let them see how much they'd been leaning on the failure they were so proud to mock.